Okay. 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 Good evening, class. Today we are going to learn about the current affairs, okay, that has happened in the last week with respect to environment. Okay, there are some issues that are very, very important that have happened in the past week, and so we must be aware of them. Okay, so starting with the first topic that we have, and that is Madhav Gargil and the Western Ghats Ecology Panel. Okay, recently what has happened in the last week? On 6th of January, Madhav Gargil, who is known as the ecologist with respect to the Western Ghats, okay, especially his name is something that is very popular because of a report, the report that was published under his leadership, under his chairmanship, okay, and therefore it has become relevant with respect to the news again because of his recent demise, right? So in the past also, we have seen questions that have come from this sensitive area of Western Ghats, right? And therefore, it makes all the more importance with respect to the previous year questions, right? So, Madhav Gadgil, this is a name that you should be aware about. The first thing that we have to be aware about with respect to the Western Ghats is how many number of states does the Western Ghats pass through. Okay, so the answer is that it is 6. For our understanding of Western Ghats, it passes through 6 states. Okay, we have Gujarat, we have Maharashtra, we have Karnataka, Goa, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. Okay, all of these 6 states would be the place where Western Ghats pass through, right? So this is a very, very you could say large contiguous area according to which your sensitive area of biodiversity is also placed, okay? And Western Ghats is also regarded as the global hotspot, okay? It means that this is a zone where the species, whether it is the plant species or also with respect to the animal species, they are threatened to some extent, okay? That is one of the definition of hotspot is that it is threatened up to 70% of its vegetation, right? It also houses a lot of endemic species. Endemic species, that means that the plants here or the animals are native to this place, right? That is, they exist in such kind of a habitat. So it becomes all the more important that we try and conserve such kind of habitats in the Western Ghats, right? So going on with respect to the report that was published by Madhav Gadgil, okay, and his team, it was in 2011. 2011 for protecting the Western Ghats, and the environmental discourse was shaped due to this report. Let us understand what was there in this report. Okay, so we have Professor Madhav Gadgil here, and what happened was that in 2010, the Ministry of Environment and Forest Climate Change, they proposed that there must be establishment of an authority, of a committee. Okay, committee, why? Because there had been a lot of disasters like landslides that were taking place in Western Ghats. Okay, also with respect to that, there was a number of economic activities which were the cause of these kind of disasters in Western Ghats, right? So normally what happens is there is ecology. Now it is in crosshairs with the economy. Okay, this means that economic activities are leading to such kind of disasters which would be ultimately going forward with destroying the hotspot landscape of Western Ghats, right? And in that context, with that kind of a motivation, we had Madhav Gadgil committee, right? So this committee was popularly known as the Gadgil Commission, right? Professor Madhav Gadgil was the chairman, And the work that was appointed to this committee was first assess the ecological status of the Western Ghats. Okay, tell us about the ecological status. That is, I know that there are hotspots. I know that there are important plant species to conserve. But tell us, what is the assessment with respect to mapping of what kind of risks and what kind of assessment do I have with respect to their conservation, right? Secondly, demarcate its ecologically sensitive areas. Okay, ecologically sensitive areas, as we know now, that it is some zone that is described to be very, very sensitive as compared to the other zones. Okay, it is under the Act of Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Okay, usually up to 10 kilometers, the area around the protected area network would be demarcated as ecological sensitive areas. Okay, and recommend sustainable development measures. Okay, whenever we are trying to talk about ecology, we are trying to talk about economy, and then we are also talking about the social welfare. We are pointing towards sustainable development, right? We are trying to go forward and understand that I just don't need development. I need a development that is sustainable in nature, and for it to be sustainable, it needs to have all of these components, right? So the Western Ghats, it spans over 1,29,037 square kilometers over the 6 states, right? And this was a project, this was a report that was published, right? Now moving forward, it is something that we need to understand the recommendations. Okay, what were the recommendations of this commission? Okay, one thing that we need to understand is that this report ultimately got rejected from the center. Okay, and therefore there was another committee that was there, and that was by the name of Kasturi Rangan committee. Okay, so we must understand what was demarcated. Okay, whether this report, that is Madhav Gadgil report, whether this report did not satisfy or did not achieve the measures of sustainable development or not. Okay, so in this slide, let us see what are the recommendations. So we have 3-tier ESZ, that is ecologically sensitive zones classification. Okay, so first recommendation was, these are the core recommendations. So the first recommendation was that cover the entire Western Ghats. Okay, let us have it under protection. Okay, and then they will divide it into various ecological sensitive zones, whether it is 1, whether it is 2, whether it is 3. Okay, now this is based upon the severity of the problems that are associated with the biodiversity and how sensitive it is. So ecological sensitive zone 1 is the one with highest sensitivity. So there would be prohibited activities that would be there, right? With respect to ecological sensitivity 2 and 3, it would be high sensitivity and moderate sensitivity. Okay, 1 would be the highest one, right? The second thing was with respect to economic activities. Okay, in the first part, we were talking about environmental conservation with the point of view of conservation in mind, so that the environment does not degrade to a point where it cannot be retrieved back or it cannot recover. Okay, now we are talking about economic activities. That is, whatever kind of activities are there, they must be prohibited. So there was strict activity restrictions with respect to genetically modified crops. Understand this, that whatever endemic species, plant species we have in that area, if that is also accompanied with crops that are genetically modified, then they pose a threat to the endemic species, and therefore there was a prohibition for the genetically modified crops. Then there was also a prohibition for the special economic zones. Okay, that means that would access and that would accelerate the economic activities in the zone. That is also something that is prohibited. The third thing was, no new mining licenses would be issued with existing mines in ESZ1 and 2 to be phased out within 5 years. This means that no new mining lease, that is mining lease from now on, since the report was published and since it would be put into play, then from that point onwards, there would be no mining leases that would be given out, and whatever mining leases were there previously, they have to be phased out within 5 years. This means that it posed a very, very strict activity restrictions, right? It did not allow for the economic activities to take place. So this means we are talking about environmental conservation, and we are even trying to minimize or reduce or phase out the economic activities, okay, according to this report. Now the third thing was Western Ghats Ecology Authority. Now this is one measure which is institutional in nature. Okay, often we see that environment comes at crossroads with the political boundaries of the state. Okay, so this becomes a problem because the jurisdiction of the states are limited to their political boundaries, but Western Ghats, so Western Ghats would spread across 6 states. Okay, so we need to have an authority that will have multi-state jurisdiction, that will prescribe what are the norms, that will have its jurisdiction across the states and would be able to dictate what are the methods in which the states can conserve the Western Ghats, right? So this is something which was proposed to be created, a statutory multi-state body under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986, right? One more thing that was a part of the core recommendations was inclusive decision making. Okay, more often it is found that when we talk about the environmental conservation, we talk about biodiversity, we talk about various other things related to the environmental conservation. The thing is that it is usually a top-down approach. When we learn it in governance, top-down approach means that someone is sitting elsewhere, okay, they are deciding the outcomes and the policies that is to be implemented on ground rather than the local communities. Okay, this is a top-down approach and it leads to a lot of loopholes, a lot of things that the top level would not understand what is existing at the bottom level, right? So this report also said that it must be important that the local communities must also be involved in conservation of Western Ghats. Okay, without their contribution, it is something that may not be possible, right? So they said that there must be empowered Gram Sabhas to be participating in the development decisions. Okay, without their support, it is not possible to conserve the Western Ghats. Okay, so all of these are quite noble in nature if we see. Okay, it is addressing the environmental conservation part, it is addressing with respect to economic activities, it is placing environment at a higher level with respect to economic activities. Okay, with respect to the institutions, the break in the governance pattern is also being addressed by the authority. Okay, a common authority that has jurisdiction over the states through which the Western Ghats run. Okay, with respect to inclusive decision making, it is also going for grassroots democracy. That is, the people are deciding for themselves what kind of land use they will have so that they can conserve the Western Ghats, right? So the next thing was, it was rejected. Okay, this kind of report was rejected by the center. Okay, the reasons given were, first, economic concerns. Okay, understand this, whenever we were talking about environment conservation measures, we were talking about economics, that is economic activities, and then we talk about the social welfare. Okay, when one of these pillars would lobby more than the other, then that would lead to rejection of such kind of reports. Okay, so number one thing that was with respect to the economic activities, since we had seen that it prohibited the genetically modified crops. Okay, it prohibited any new mining licenses to be given out. It said that the phasing out in ESZ1 and ESZ2 should happen within the next 5 years. Okay, this means that there is shutting down of economic activities. That was one of the reasons why this report came out to be rejected. That is in form of strong political resistance, particularly from Kerala and Maharashtra. Okay, so they said that there would be effect on the cash crops cultivation and mining operations and hydroelectric projects. Okay, even the hydroelectric projects are being affected. Okay, understand this, that Western Ghats are like water factory for the southern part, for the coastal part. Okay, they have a huge amount of vegetation that is evergreen in nature, semi-evergreen, evergreen vegetation exists over there. Okay, a lot of transpiration happens through this process, and a lot of rivers originate or pass through that geographical feature, right? So even the hydroelectric projects are something that are utilizing the stored potential within the water dropping from a very good height, right? So these are also going to be affected. So it said that it is hurting our economic activities. The second point was institutional conflicts. Okay, we talked about a multi-state statutory body. Okay, something that has a jurisdiction over all the 6 states through which the Western Ghats run. Okay, now the state will have a problem. The states which are having a problem, they will fear that there would be what? There would be loss of autonomy. Okay, autonomy to deal with the resources. They will have to adhere to the norms that are given by this authority, right? So it was something that was feared. Proposed Western Ghats Ecological Authority fearing loss of autonomy and that stringent regulations would make agriculture and human habitation impossible. Okay, so what is the ultimate fate? The ultimate fate is that this gets rejected by the central government. Okay, and this also suggests that we must go for some alternative kind of conservation method. Maybe we can go for some other report. Okay, and the other report comes out in the form of Kasturi Rangan report. Okay, so let us see what is it. Okay, so Kasturi Rangan committee came in, okay, and they set other kind of recommendations that were different from Gadgil report. Okay, what did they say? It said that we are not demarcating the whole of Western Ghats. The whole of Western Ghats is not something that we are demarcating as ecologically sensitive. Rather, I must follow a path of development that is balancing both environment as well as the economic activities, right? So they said that we will divide Western Ghats into natural landscape and cultural landscape. Natural landscape would be the ones that would require conservation, and that is mainly driven by the plant species and the animal species, while the cultural landscape is the one that is more man-made in nature, that is practicing agriculture, that is practicing animal husbandry, okay, that is deriving resources out of these areas of Western Ghats, right? So natural landscape was approximately 41% of the geographical area, right? And amongst that, the biologically rich, okay, read that with respect to the ecologically sensitive parts. In Gadgil report, we were talking about ecologically sensitive zones 1, 2 and 3, okay, covering entire Western Ghats, and this area was 1,29,000 approximately. This was the area. Okay, now Kasturi Rangan report, it reduced that area to just 37%, right? It said that only out of the natural landscape, 37 is biologically rich with some measure of contiguity. Any restrictions were only placed in this area. Okay, we were talking about the prohibited activities in ESZ 1 and 2 in Gadgil report. We said that they should be phasing out mining operations, right? But it limited that this prohibited activity should be only in 37%. Okay, all the other area is now to be considered open for developmental activities, right? The second thing was it proposed the demarcation of ESZ be done at the village level. Okay, village level, meaning that we are not going for a landscape approach of conservation. That is, we are not trying to conserve the whole of the things. We are trying to conserve only up to a specific village, right? Only village specific entities, areas would be the ones that would be under some kind of conservation. And with respect to industries, not all industries, but only red category industries that are more heavily polluting, right? So this brought in a lot of changes with respect to the Gadgil report, right? So it was in 2013, the recommendations in a holistic and multidisciplinary fashion, that is going from just environmental conservation to economic activities, balanced development as well, right? So here only 56,825 kilometers square, that is half of Gadgil's recommendations, were recommended for any kind of prohibitions. We are talking about the difference, 1,29,000 kilometers square cut down to 56,825, right? So this was the Kasturi Rangan report, right? That came right after the Gadgil report. All right. So Madhav Gadgil is not just limited to the report that he published as a chairman of the committee. There are multiple things that are associated with this personality. Okay, this personality is quite magnanimous when it comes to ecological sciences. Okay, he was the founder of Center of Ecological Sciences at IISc in Bengaluru, right? And he has also been a very big contributor with respect to the acts, with respect to Forest Rights Act, with respect to Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Okay, he has been a conservation advocate with respect to those acts, right? And then what are some books? Because sometimes they will ask the authors and the books also. So the books that was written by him, This Fissured Land and Ecological History of India, and Ecology and Equity, right? He was also honored with Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan. These are the highest civilian honors that are given, right? So this is in news and it becomes very, very important even for this year's prelims. Okay, now moving on to the next part. It is with respect to biodiversity and its conservation. Okay, so the news is, it says Jabarkhet Nature Reserve, a decade of conservation innovation. Okay, we are talking about innovations in conservation efforts also, right? So the thing is, it has completed a decade. It started as a reserve for conservation efforts in 2015 and it is already now 10 years since it has began its conservation efforts. Okay, so let us understand what it is about. Okay, so Jabarkhet Nature Reserve, it was a forest area, right? It is a forest area, but it is, why is it of significance and why are we noting this kind of a reserve, is because it is something that is privately owned. Okay, it is first privately owned nature reserve pioneering a conservation first model near Mussoorie. Okay, so it is of importance. Why? First, it is privately, and second, it also tells us about the methods of conservation. Is it only the government that requires to go for conservation efforts, or we can also trust some private agencies to carry it out and conserve the environment, conserve the forested areas, okay, with respect to the wildlife, with respect to the plants. Okay, so this kind of a conservation is something that can also be replicated at multiple other levels, right? So let us see why this matters now. Okay, why this matters now, particularly in the country. One is with respect to the ecological pressures. Okay, it is particularly Jabarkhet Nature Reserve is in Uttarakhand. Okay, that is nested in the Himalayas, right? And in Himalayan ecosystem, we are facing a number of threats. Okay, because Himalayan ecosystem is being threatened by the various tourism footfalls. Okay, a lot of people want to visit those places, and it has been seen over the number of years that a lot of people are visiting those places. This means that there is a change with respect to the infrastructure that is to be required in this fragile Himalayan ecosystem, right? So we have road widening projects, and these are leading to what? Disasters like landslides that are across Himalayas, right? Secondly, when we talk about Aravali's, okay, recently Supreme Court has also, we have seen it in the news that Aravali Hills, the definitions which are related to Aravali Hills and ranges, okay, when we say that it is not to be more than, if it is more than height of 100 meters, then it is classified as Aravali Hill, right? This is also being put forward to understand the mining operations and allow deforestation within those areas. 90% of that area is not meeting the definition. Okay, that is the reason that Supreme Court has stayed on that definition, right? Then mass tourism that is also affecting the fragile ecosystem of Himalayas. Habitat fragmentation. Understand this, that whenever we are trying to talk about the wildlife conservation, then the wildlife is affected by linear infrastructures. What do I mean by linear infrastructures? The ones that are created and that will fragment the habitat into two. Okay, suppose there was a contiguous zone of habitat. This is the whole habitat, and then you had a road passing through it. This means that this becomes two other habitats, right? It will lead to a number of problems with respect to resources, with respect to habitat fragmentation, with respect to the breeding, right? With respect to the spread of diseases. Okay, so this linear infrastructure, while it is created as a motive for developmental activity and increasing the tourism footfall, it is also something that is very detrimental to the wildlife conservation, right? Then tourism debate. Okay, we talk about tourism and we talk about especially wildlife tourism, and it has to be sustainable in nature. Okay, that we should not be lost so much in the economic aspect of it, the revenue generating aspect of it, that we are going for a tourism which is unsustainable in nature, okay, which is destroying the places, the species of plants and animals that people have come to actually see, right? So this becomes important now because we are also talking about the balance between the economic development and conservation, right? Secondly, sustainable tourism versus mass visitor influx. Okay, we are saying that since there has been increase of footfall of tourists within these zones, it means that there is a threat to the sustainable tourism that have been created. Okay, these ecosystems can handle only a particular number of tourists at some time. Okay, and if that exceeds, then that will result into unsustainable. Need for alternative models beyond tiger safaris. Okay, now we are just focusing on different kinds of models. Okay, we are saying that okay, forests are to be existing, protected areas are to be there, but what are the models of tourism, that is ecotourism, that I can have so that I go for sustainable development? Okay, so the models that are available for ecotourism are only a few. We have not been able to discover a lot of such innovative models, and Jabarkhet Nature Reserve offers us an alternative model, and that is the reason that we are talking about it under tourism as well. Okay, fourth thing is role of private reserves in landscape protection. It means that it is not just the public agencies that have the capacity to restore or conserve the environment, it is also the private agencies as well, right? So what are the core features? Core features of this nature reserve. First of all, as we had seen, that it is located near Mussoorie in Uttarakhand, and 100 acres of restored Himalayan footland. It has been accredited with such kind of an achievement. Okay. The second thing is ownership. As we said, that ownership is private. Okay, it is owned by a Jain family estate, right? This means that it is a conservation-led management model since 2015, and it has completed a decade. What is the mission? The mission is first, that is habitat restoration. Okay, whatever damages have been there with respect to the soil, with respect to the plant species, with respect to the animals, because of various types of human activities, this habitat fragmentation, degradation must be restored so that these habitat can be again viable for the living by these wildlife and plants. The second thing is wildlife first access. This is very, very important. Why wildlife first access? This means that when I'm talking about two things, when I'm talking about ecotourism, it is made up of two words. I'm talking about environment, and I'm then talking also about the people who are coming to visit. Okay. Oftentimes, when we are considering tourism as an economic activity, we often give priority to the people, right? People will have with respect to the infrastructure that is required. Okay, people will have with respect to the sightseeing that is required. Okay, so they are always given priority in such kind of ecotourism just because the revenue generated is to be on a higher side. Okay, but now we are talking about wildlife first access. This means that we are placing more importance on environment. That is, it is the people who will have to adjust to the wildlife and not the other way around, right? So this is an innovation in the model of conservation of species. The third thing is low impact and affordable tourism. Okay, that is, it is not to be with respect to the impact, with respect to suppose say we have enabled tourism, then there is huge amount of waste that gets accumulated, there is huge amount of noise pollution, there is huge amount of light pollution that is happening. So all of this has to be restricted, it has to be low impact. That is, it must be taught to the tourist that these are the things that you cannot do, right? And it should be affordable also in nature, right? So it is definitely tilting it towards the environmental conservation. Okay, that is, people become guests of this reserve, right? Now, the biodiversity that is present here is very, very remarkable. Okay, we can find 150 bird species, that is the avian diversity, 150 bird species, and they include Rufus sibia and Himalayan griffon vulture. Okay, vulture are the scavengers, right? Mammals like leopard, goral, barking deer, black bear, civet, porcupine, and leopard cat. These are important mammals. Okay, some of them are also endangered or vulnerable species, right? Flora richness, oaks, deodars, rhododendrons, fern species, ground orchids. These are the plants that are available, right? So it becomes a very, very beautiful conservation reserve, right? Now moving forward, we see why it becomes innovative also with respect to the model of ecotourism, model of wildlife conservation, is because we have three models. Firstly, we have three models of wildlife tourism. Okay, most of us would be aware about the safari based tourism. Okay, the one in which you will go to the tiger reserves in gypsy safaris and you would be able to spot tigers, right? Sometimes you will spot a tiger, sometimes you won't be able to spot, right? So you are focusing more on the star species. Okay, that is, you are focusing on the tigers that are present here, right? What is the challenge with respect to this kind of a model of conservation? The problem is that there would be overcrowding. Okay, there would be overcrowding and it would be spectacle driven experiences. That means I am just going for viewing one of the species out of the whole forest, right? And to achieve that objective, every tourist operator would want to maximize those chances, right? This is one method, right? The second model is guided community trails. That is, it is expert driven, species specific, and you will have niche experiences, right? So this will lead to very, very high cost. Okay, because you need experts to introduce you to the guided trails, experts to tell you about the niches, experts to tell you about what are the species that are present and you can watch them, right? So it becomes highly costly. It is very, very expensive and there is limited accessibility. Okay, so when we are talking about with this respect, we are talking about that there would be overcrowding. Okay, in this model there would be overcrowding. In the second model, it requires experts and it is very, very expensive. And then comes the third model. Okay, third model that is there plying in Jabarkhet nature reserves. it says that there would be self-paced walking trails. That is, you go onto the trails, you are according to your own speed, according to your own level of interest, you go on a nature walk. The second thing is wildlife first approach, and there are no vehicles. It means that the right of way is given to the wildlife. Wildlife is the one who is hosting and you are the guest there, right? So you must apply accordingly, that is, you must behave accordingly to the wildlife that is present, right? So the advantage is that there would be low footprint. Okay, that is not an easy trail that you can walk into, right? So there would be low footprint, it would be more affordable, and it would be also enhancing your engagement with the natural history of the place, right? So this becomes a model in which we can conserve even with respect to the private agencies, right? So what are the key takeaways? One is the recovery without spectacle. Okay, when we were talking about safaris, we were talking about humans being there, overcrowding. Okay, when we were talking about the guided trail, we are talking about less number of humans, limited humans, or none at all. Okay, when we are talking about JNR, that is Jabar Khet Nature Reserve, we are talking about a midway. Okay, we see that the recovery is maximum when human access is restrained and not eliminated. You should not eliminate it. You should offer ways of ecotourism. The second thing is private conservation potential. This means that even with respect to the private family that is holding this estate, that is a Jan family, okay, even the private operators can manage this job very, very well, right? And they can also complement the state-run protected areas in the form of national parks, biosphere reserves, or wildlife sanctuaries. Then regulation and incentives needed. Okay, so we also need to understand that if this kind of a model is something that is very, very suitable for the conservation efforts and also ties with the community stakeholders, then it should be labeled, it should be incentivized by the government itself, right? So this becomes our key takeaways of the conservation efforts, right? Now talking about a species, this is again from the topic of biodiversity and conservation. Okay, so as the title reads, we are talking about white-bellied heron, that is a species on the brink. Okay, you would be knowing about the conservation status with respect to IUCN. It is a species that is critically endangered. Okay, now it is also colliding with something that is a economic activity with respect to hydroelectric project. Okay, so that is why it becomes a news. The biodiversity is critically endangered and we are trying to install a hydroelectric project in that zone. This means that you are going to degrade the habitat because we want to pursue some of the economic development. Okay, so Kalai 2 hydropower project in Arunachal Pradesh has reignited urgent concerns about India's most threatened bird species and fragile Himalayan riverine ecosystem it depends upon, right? So let us understand what is the issue. Okay, so environmental clearance raises red flags. Okay, understand this, what has happened, that to have any kind of developmental activity in place, what do we need? We need to clear with respect to what is known as EIA. That is, I am going for understanding environmental impact assessment of that developmental activity over the environment with respect to the wildlife, with respect to the plants, with respect to the total environment. Okay, so there are multiple steps that are involved, and EIA is a bridge that connects economic activity with environmental conservation. Okay, it connects both of them. Okay, if we just talk about environmental conservation, there would be some activities that are very, very necessary for the social welfare that would be eliminated if these economic activities are not carried out. At the same time, the balance must be ensured with respect to environmental conservation, so that it does not go into a zone where it cannot recover itself, right? So we are talking about 1200 megawatt Kalai 2 hydropower project on which river? Lohit river. Okay, Lohit river, you must be aware that feeds into Brahmaputra. Okay, so the issue is that there are serious gaps with respect to the environmental impact assessment. It has failed to adequately address the threats related to critically endangered wild-bellied heron. Okay, so there is a question with respect to environmental impact assessment, okay, which had the serious gaps, as well as it did not address whatever was important with respect to the habitat of critically endangered white-bellied heron. It is not addressed properly, and that is why it raises a question on the thoroughness of the project, right? Now, what is it, which corporation is it under, this hydropower project? It is Tehri Hydro Developmental Corporation, right? So these are the red flags. Okay, we are talking about sustainable development, but it is not something that is adhering to the environmental conservation. Okay, so in this case, with respect to from the point of view of our exam, it becomes very important to know about the species that is critically endangered. Okay, sometimes they will ask you what is the IUCN status. They may ask you what is the features with respect to its bodily parts. Okay, so first is they are specialized hunter. Okay, hunter and specialized we will see because of the kind of beak they have. Okay, it has a razor sharp serrated bill. This means that it is saw shaped, and it has a flexible neck. Okay, all of this, both with respect to the beak of wide-bellied heron as well as with respect to the flexibility of its neck. It is both are important with respect to catching of fish, right? Extended toes grip slippery rocks in the fast currents. Okay, it also has extended toes. Okay, then second is habitat specialist, strictly dependent on free-flowing eastern Himalaya rivers with minimal human disturbances, highly sensitive to flow alterations from the dams. Okay, so its habitat specialist means that it is more dependent upon the habitat and is very, very sensitive to changes that are there in the flow. Okay, so when we are talking about hydroelectric project, we are basically talking about the flow fluctuations that would happen, right? And that would also degrade the habitat and this critically endangered animal. Okay, then third, it is the world's second largest. That makes it much more important to be conserved. Okay, it is the second largest heron species globally, with a compact body and a shorter legs for stability in rushing waters, right? Now we will see that why do we call it critically endangered? We call it critically endangered because the global population has fallen to less than 60. This is the number of individuals that are surviving in the wild. Okay. And Bhutan's share is 45%. Last stronghold with 3 to 5 active breeding pairs, right? This means that once this species is lost in the wild and also in the breeding centers, this means that we will lose this species forever. They will be extinct, right? And this makes it much more important to be conserved. It is also enlisted as critically endangered and comes in Schedule 1 under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, right? So it is distributed with respect to Himalayan freshwater ecosystem. It is extinct already in Nepal and possibly in Bangladesh as well. Okay, there has been limited sightings with respect to Arunachal Pradesh, and that is why we are also trying to conserve it. That is why there are gaps. Okay, that is why we try to plug in the gaps with respect to the environmental impact assessment. Okay, so why this matters? First of all, it is a bioindicator species. Okay, that is, we were talking about fluctuations in flow. Okay, that is going to affect the habitat itself of the white-bellied heron. Then habitat under pressure. The Lohit River, it is flowing from Tibet to Mishmi Hills to join Brahmaputra. It faces multiple hydropower projects. Okay, if you can see here that this is the Lohit River. Okay, this undergoes this part and then it joins what is your Brahmaputra. Okay, so this whole river is also laden with what? A number of hydroelectric projects. Hydroelectric projects lead to flows, fluctuations, and that leads to habitat issues for white-bellied heron, right? So you can see how the developmental activities collide with environmental conservation. Cascading threats. Dams fragment habitat and alter flows essential for feeding. Combined with hunting disturbance and a tiny gene pool, the species face immediate extinction risk. Okay, it is very important to understand that gene pool is also limited. Okay, when you fragment, if you have this much amount of habitat to move, if you fragment it like this in multiple zones, that means the gene pool also has only this much, these squares amount of area available for it to interact with other individuals of their own species. That restricts the gene pool. That increases the possibility of having diseases, right? So this is also something that is very concerning. Okay. Now moving on to the next part. Okay, we are talking about indigenous biomaterials. Okay, now this part is related to environmental pollution and degradation. Okay, it is one of the solutions that is being offered as an alternative to the petroleum based products. Okay, so it is a pathway to cut fossil imports, one with respect to the fossil imports, and second also build India's bioeconomy. Let's learn about this. Okay, so why biomaterials matter now? Okay, we have to understand that this is a very, very big industry now. Okay, it is leading to a 500 million industry in 2024, and it also has a strong growth potential. This means that if India does not go forward with installing the necessary things that are required to go forward with this industry, then it is going to fall behind, right? Not only fall behind with this type of industry, but also it is going to pay a lot of economic cost. Not just economic cost, it is also going to pay a high amount of environmental cost. Okay, and then we are lagging behind in $500 million industry. That is in 2024 it was estimated to be that. Okay, so first of all, what is with respect to biomaterials, what are biomaterials? Biomaterials are the materials that are derived from the biological origin, right? The biological agents go forward in having these materials being manufactured, right? And these are some things that will behave just like the plastic products that you have. Okay, so therefore it becomes an important substitute product with respect to the petroleum products, right? So first thing is strategic import substitution. We are already depending upon petroleum based plastics, chemicals and materials, and this can be replaced by the bio based derivatives. Second thing is economic growth. We are talking about value chains, okay, and domestic industrial capacity across the sectors. It will help in textiles, it will help in packaging, okay, it will help in with respect to the fibers also, geotextiles, right? Then farmer income diversification, because these bio-based products would be raw materials that would be derived from the farms itself. Okay, so we are talking about, when we talk about doubling of farmers' income, we are also talking about trying to diversify the sources of income. Okay, and if such kind of an industry which requires such raw materials from the farmers, it will also enhance their earning capacity. Then global competitiveness, because world is moving towards low carbon regulations. Okay, it will align with low carbon regulations. Why do we want low carbon? Because we understand that if there is increased amount of carbon, then that will result into either carbon dioxide, it will either result into carbon monoxide or methane. Okay, all of this will have environmental pollution effects, or it will lead to a greenhouse gas, right? So we are trying to move, the world is trying to move towards low carbon regulations, and growing consumer demand for sustainable products. Okay, so it matters at present because of these reasons. Okay, next, understanding what are the three pathways in which biomaterials can be made. Okay, how they can be made. One is the drop in biomaterial, other is drop out, and then we have the third one, that is novel biomaterials. What is the difference between the three? The first one is one in which it is very much chemically identical to the petroleum based products. Okay, this means that it aligns well with the manufacturing infrastructure that is existing today with respect to the petroleum based products. Dropout are the ones that does not align with it. Okay, it means that you need new kinds of infrastructure to produce these kind of biomaterials. Okay, here the examples are biopet for bottles or polylactic acid for packaging in case of dropout. Novel biomaterials, advanced properties unavailable in conventional materials. That is, it will have properties that are much more advanced with respect to the petroleum based products that we use now, right? So understanding what with respect to the journey of biomaterials as in the context of Indian economy, how have we progressed? The market foundation, bioplastics market was valued at $500 million in 2024. Okay, then there were industrial pioneers. Industrial pioneers meaning the industries which started with respect to the bioplastics, with respect to drop in or drop out materials, right? So Balrampur Chini Mills, that was in Uttar Pradesh, and Praj Industries, they were operating demonstration scale facilities. Then innovation ecosystem. Okay, they were talking about converting temple waste into biomaterials. Okay, so this was a startup, that is fool.co. Then technology gap. We understand that we do have a technology gap because we depend upon the foreign technologies for converting this biomass feedstocks into the petroleum based products. Like that is not exactly the petroleum based products, but it is with respect to the likeliness, that is with respect to the strength, with durability, with respect to the material that is very, very much similar to the petroleum based products, right? So what are the critical constraints that we must address? First of all, because it is derived from the raw materials that is grown, that is from biological processes only. Okay, so it will compete with the feedstock. Okay, it will compete with the agricultural products that are particularly there for humans as well as animals. Okay, the second thing is resource stress. Intensive cultivation, it risks water depletion and soil degradation. Okay, when we are going for biomaterials, we are also talking about the water that is required to sustain these crops, right? They will also be under scarcity. They will be under stress. Infrastructure deficit. Weak waste collection and composting systems may negate environmental benefits. Okay, because we have weaker collection systems. Okay, we have a lot of the waste that we collect is something that is not very much segregated. Okay, that affects the strategy with which we dispose it of, right? Then policy fragmentation, disconnected silos across agriculture, industry, and environmental ministries. That is, all of these have different perspectives. Okay, they must be aligned. Okay, they are working in silos, they are working separately. Then global competition risk. Delayed action may lock India into dependence on imported biomaterials. Okay, it is always the first movers that will get the advantage. Okay, that will be pioneers in that industry, and they will, with respect to the technological innovation, they will be able to come out with cheaper products. And therefore, India may lose the competitive edge when it comes to delayed action, right? So these are the important constraints that we must address. Okay, now coming on to this next part, that is urban greening. Okay, urban greening. There has been a new observation that it is not always a coal solution. Okay, we are talking about what? Climate change. Okay, we are talking about climate change, right? because we understand that there is urban heat island effect. Okay, that is with respect to the concretization. Okay, concretization, that is the materials, that is cement that is used in the buildings, as well as asbestos that is used in various kinds of infrastructure, right? So this means that these substances are much more absorbing of heat as compared to bare soil, okay, as compared to the vegetation. So we had a solution. We said that there is urban heat island effect, and therefore I may have a solution by saying that increase the amount of vegetation, because this vegetation will perform what is known as evapotranspiration. Okay, and it is understood from this process that what it will do, it will lower the temperature of the local area of that urban city. Okay, this is what we understand, right? But it has been observed in this present news headline that urban greening, even though if we are going for greening, that is with respect to increasing vegetation in these urban spaces, it is not a solution that will lower the temperature. Okay, let us see in which conditions it is not going to be a proper solution. Okay, so the first thing is why cities are getting hotter. One is the global climate change. Okay, that is the increase in long-term average temperature of the world, right? Then there is urban heat island effect. As compared to the rural areas that are on the sides, you will find that there is increased amount of temperature with respect to that urban space, right? Now this becomes this brings in the greening factor, right? Now temperature regulation capacity with respect to the vegetation, we talk about the temperature between the vegetated and the built up surfaces. That is, we are talking about concrete with respect to asphalt and cement that have higher absorptive capacity, and vegetation, right? What is the differences? So negative value, when we see that vegetation is there, then I will have cooler temperatures. Okay, this is observed. Positive value, it is vegetation warmer than built surfaces, warming effect occurs. Okay, this is where our said notion that vegetation will always lead to cooler surface temperatures becomes challenged. Okay, we say that with respect to negative value, it can have both the values. Okay, both the values meaning that it can deliver if there is moisture already within this system. Okay, then it will deliver negative value. This means that there would be cooler temperatures that is observed. That means evapotranspiration would definitely take place. But it will also have a positive value in certain kinds of environment. That means that it will have a positive value, that is increase in temperatures wherever the areas are dry, that is not laden with moisture, right? So this becomes a challenge because we thought planting trees, having vegetation around ponds, having trees on the side of the highways would solve the problem of urban heat island effect. Okay, but it is not something that is true with respect to the drier areas, and that will also result into temperatures that are even warmer than the built up surfaces, right? So let us see when vegetation warms the cities. Okay, so 25% cities experience warming, nearly 1/4 of the cities saw net warming from vegetation. Okay, so we had urban heat island, we planted trees, and we found that instead of lowering the temperature, it has increased the temperature, and this has been happening in 25% of the sampled cities, right? Then 1000 millimeter rainfall threshold. Cities below 1000 millimeter annual rainfall were the most affected. So among this, we tried to find out what is the common thing. Okay, what is with respect to rainfall. Okay, understand this, that terrestrial ecosystem is something that is affected by two things. One is temperature and other is rainfall. So within this 25%, I find that cities which are getting less than 1000 millimeter rainfall annually, then those would be the ones that would be receiving higher amount of temperatures, right? So this is a research that helps us to analyze what kind of solutions can we have to the changing climate. Okay, limited water availability, it weakens evapotranspiration, reducing the cooling effect in arid regions. We are just talking about the drier regions. Okay, that is why we are saying less than 1000 millimeter of rainfall annually. Solar radiation absorption. Vegetation absorbs more heat than some built surfaces. Even with respect to the built surfaces, it can absorb more amount of heat. Okay, so what are the critical implications for India? First, with respect to heat stress response, plant restrict water loss during stress, cutting evaporative cooling. Okay, the second thing is climate appropriate vegetation. That is, vegetation should not be only done blindly. It should be appropriate with respect to the climate. That is, whether it is a wet climate, okay, whether it is having abundant rainfall or whether it is dry in nature. If you plant trees here, if you plant any vegetation over here, then this will result into even higher temperatures, and that is going to defeat the purpose, right? So it should be climate appropriate. Then integrated planning, heat mitigation strategies must consider local climate conditions. Okay, that is, one size fits all policy may not work in this kind of a solution, right? So with this, we complete the current affairs for this week with respect to environment. Here are some questions that you can try and answer. These are previous year questions. Okay. The first is Gadgil Committee report and Kasturi Rangan report, sometimes seen in the news, are related to which of the following? Okay. Try and answer this in the comment section. Okay. The next question is related to Prelims 2014 question. Okay. It talks about the eco-sensitive zones. Okay. Since we talked about eco-sensitive zones this time, okay, first is asking, these are the zones that are areas that are declared under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Is this correct or wrong? Right, we have discussed this. Then the purpose of declaration of ESZ is to prohibit all kinds of human activities in those zones except agriculture. Okay, is it correct or is it wrong? Okay, try to answer these questions in the comment section. Okay, so with this we come to an end. Thank you so much. All the best.